In our previous lesson, we talked about the concept of evolution, and one thing we took away from this lesson was the concept of fitness. Fitness, as popularized in Darwin and Wallace's theory of evolution. Organisms with characteristics or qualities that increase the likelihood of survival in a particular environment will therefore be able to survive long enough to reproduce and be more likely to pass on their genes. Such conditions explain phenomena such as speciation, speciation, which explains why we have so many different organisms with different qualities and traits throughout the planet. And one organism I like to use as an example here is the giant squid. So what do we know about the characteristics and the organism's niche of a giant squid and where it resides in its environment? Well, for one thing, the giant squid is actually rather high up in the deep sea food chain, consuming a variety of fish and crustaceans. But likewise, it's also consumed and preyed upon by larger organisms such as sharks and whales. And you'll notice that the giant squid actually has its own defense mechanism, and that is called deep sea gigantism, which is a quality that many deep sea organisms have to simply be too large to be preyed upon by organisms. And due to the high pressure of the sea, larger organisms that can prey on them, such as these whales and sharks, will be unable to, since they cannot withstand the high pressures of the deep sea. But before we delve deeper, first we must talk about the taxonomic classification of the organism. Now, the giant squid has many different species under this umbrella term. However, the most recently discovered species is as follows. First, we must start with the kingdom and work our way down to species. So, the giant squid is. And this list here is as follows: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Usually, when we refer to the scientific name of an organism, we talk about these last two. So, let us talk about the evolutionary history of the giant squid. Giant squid have been around for hundreds of millions of years, as evidenced by various fossils we have found, showing a mollusk-like shell, which is not present in modern-day squid. But before we get to that, let us also talk about something that has affected the giant squid specifically, which would be deep sea gigantism, as previously mentioned. Now, most squid are not nearly as large as the giant squid. However, the giant squid has evolved to be this size due to the pressures imposed upon it by natural selection. So these pressures include larger predators that are present in the middle region of the ocean, leading to the squid being more easily caught and unable to fight off larger predators. So not only has the giant squid moved from the upper regions of the ocean to the deepest parts, it has also grown in size. So we know that the giant squid is the size such that it can survive the pressures of the deep, but also so it could resist and fight off predators by just simply being too large. Most fish of the deep sea are not very large, and the larger an organism gets, especially if it's a vertebrate, the more difficulty it faces with higher pressure, such that larger organisms like whales and sharks that can actually prey on the giant squid are forced to stay in this middle region of the ocean and not able to journey to the depths that the giant squid can. Another thing we also have to consider is the concept of vestigial traits. Vestigial traits. And it circles right back to this hard shell versus soft shell argument. So we know the squids of the past had hard shells evidenced by fossils. But why don't we see that today? Well, we know that having a larger shell and a stronger shell, while it can protect you from smaller attacks, also slows you down significantly. So, as fish got larger and had better tools, like sharper teeth, to break this armored shell, it became obsolete. And over time, squid that happened to have a softer shell would be more likely to survive, as they could more easily escape, since the shell is lighter. So, over time, the hard shell of the ancestral squids has slowly disappeared and died out until we had the cephalopods of today. So now, let us talk about a way we can classify various traits. And one of these ways is the cladogram, in which we can take a pool of organisms and classify them based on their many qualities. Those with derived traits will differ them from other modern species and cause these various branches you'll see. But let us actually get to this diagram. So, we can still classify these organisms based off the various genetic differences, despite them being aquatic organisms. So, the list I've prepared for us today to try is the giant squid, of course, giant squid, and I'll just list them here just to save time. The reef squid, the cuttlefish, octopus, scallop, clam, sea snail, clownfish, salmon, anglerfish, and tiger shark. So, some of these organisms are actually fish, meaning that they are vertebrae, meaning they have bones and a backbone. So, the organisms that are the clownfish, salmon, anglerfish, and tiger shark can be divided off into this category. Another thing we have to consider is our other side, which has been largely made up of mollusks, ranging from the giant squid to the sea snail. These organisms have the hard shells, except for the cephalopods, of course, and this is why we're going to classify them over here. So, how can we divide these up further? Let's start with the vertebrate. We know that most fish actually have bony structures, but this differs from the tiger shark. Like most sharks, it actually has cartilage, making up its structure here. So we can automatically put the tiger shark separate from the rest of these fish. Now, how can we divide the rest? Well, we know the salmon and clownfish are probably going to be more similar than the anglerfish, since it resides at deep depths. And we notice that the anglerfish has also evolved bioluminescent fin. To use as a lure for smaller prey. So we can use that as a branching point here and have the anglerfish split here. So that leaves us the clownfish and the salmon. And the most striking difference we can come up with here is the striped and colorful patterns of the clownfish. So we have the clownfish, forgive the handwriting, and the salmon. So that still leaves us with 7 organisms: the giant squid, reef squid, cuttlefish, octopus, scallop, clam, and sea snail. So we know that although they're all mollusks, some of them have soft shells and some of them have hard shells. So we can use that to divide this up. So we'll have the soft shell organism split here. But first, let's do the hard shell. So for our hard-shelled organisms, we have the scallop, clam, and sea snail. And one way we can divide them is by their means of movement. While clams and snails use a foot to move, and they're usually attached to the ground, the mollusk actually has adductor muscles which can force water out of its shell and use it to propel itself forward. So we can use that as our derived trait here, adductor muscles. So we put the scallop down here. And for the rest of these, we have the clam and sea snail, and we can just look at their shells. Coiled shell of the sea snail is a pretty distinct feature here, so we can put that separate. Sea snail. And one thing I would like to note is the direction of time here. Now, most cladograms actually go in another direction, but just to ensure clarity here, know that time is increasing in this way, with modern organisms being along this bottom row. So let's finish off with our final 4 organisms. We have the giant squid, the reef squid, cuttlefish, and octopus. Well, we can split off the octopus right away by looking at the tentacle count. 8 tentacles for the octopus already separates it from the cuttlefish and various squids, as they have 10 tentacles. So now we can differ the cuttlefish because it actually has dorsal fins. Dorsal fins. In an overall smaller shape. So we'll have to put this little cuttlefish, leaving us with our two squids, the reef and giant squid. And the difference here is very apparent. Deep sea gigantism. So we have our giant squid and reef squid. And now we can see how a common ancestor can lead us to all of these different organisms here. So as we've established today, the giant squid has changed much over time, from its ancestors with hard shells, small bodies, to very large but softer shells that we see in the giant squid today. Forgive the drawing. So, giant squid is pressured by the whale and shark population, and due to their weak physique, once caught, they can do little but scare their predators. As such, variations of the giant squid in the future that are faster and more agile can more easily maneuver and escape predators. So, for example, if the squid has stronger tentacles to propel itself through the water, it will be more likely to survive. So that could be a possible variation in the future. Furthermore, the giant squid could also follow the qualities of a certain species of moth. This seems very tangentially related here. However, we have to look at what the moth's predator is, which would be the bat. And the bat uses its echolocation to find the moth. Well, various species of moth have evolved certain adaptations that allow it to actually absorb the sound waves such that it doesn't bounce back to the bat. The majority of its predators are actually whales, who use echolocation as well. So, a giant squid that has a softer shell and softer body could more easily absorb these sound waves, bouncing less or none of the sound waves back to the whale as well. Overall, we can see how evolution can affect a certain organism and how it can change over time. So, one thing I want you to take away from this lesson is being able to understand that evolution is not very certain. We can't be 100% sure what happens in the past or in the future. However, we can look at what factors have affected the organisms of the past to lead them to change to become the organisms today, and likewise, what factors will affect the modern day organisms and change it for the future. So, the takeaway here is to look at patterns of other organisms like fish, and see how they've changed over time, while also looking at the patterns seen by squid, what factors have affected them, and using the knowledge you find from both of these to give a reasonable prediction on what happened in the past, and therefore what will happen in the future. Thank you for watching.